Is this the part where I'm supposed to tremble, Dominic? Or should I just laugh at how pathetic you look with that belt? I didn't back away. I didn't flinch. I stood in the center of the vaulted living room of our Aspen estate, my boots planted firmly on the $20,000 Persian rug. Outside, the Colorado blizzard howled, but the storm inside this room was far more lethal. Dominic, my husband of 5 years, stood before me, his face a distorted mask of drunken rage. He was wrapping his heavy leather belt around his hand, the brass buckle clinking like a funeral bell. "You've been playing me for a fool, Valerie," he roared, his voice bouncing off the timber-framed ceiling. "I saw the notification on your phone. A dinner reservation for two. I pay for your life, your clothes, your very existence, and you think you can sneak around behind my back. I wasn't sneaking, you arrogant prick." I spat, my voice cold and sharp as a razor. I was celebrating the fact that I'm finally done with this charade. But since you're so obsessed with transparency, why don't we talk about the $95,000 you lost in the market last quarter? Or should I call your bookie? Shut your mouth! Dominic lunged, his hand raised. I stepped into his strike zone, my eyes boring into his. "Do it! Strike me! Give me the last piece of evidence I need to take every cent you have left. I dare you!" "Dominic, sit down." "Eleanor." My mother-in-law snapped from her armchair. She looked at me with pure venom, her fingers clutching a glass of vintage Bordeaux. "Valerie, you are a guest in this family. You were a waitress when my son found you. You should be on your knees thanking him, not provoking him with your trailer park temper." I turned my gaze to her, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "A guest, Eleanor? I've been the one keeping the skeletons in your closet from rattling for half a decade. And as for being a waitress, at least I earned my money honestly. I didn't have to sleep with my daughter's husband to pay for my jewelry." The room went deathly silent. Sebastian, my sister-in-law's husband, choked on his cognac. Ivy, Dominic's younger sister, froze by the Christmas tree. "What did you just say?" Ivy whispered. "You heard me, Ivy," I said, my voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Your mother and your husband have been having a little charity auction of their own in the guest house. And guess who was the highest bidder?" "You're insane!" Sebastian shouted. "Dominic, she's lost it. Am I?" I pulled out a small silver remote. "I've spent $15,000 on surveillance over the last month. I didn't do it to catch you, Dominic. You're too predictable. I did it because I smelled something rotten, and I wanted to see how deep the maggots went." Dominic charged at me. I didn't run. I stepped behind the mahogany island and held the remote high. "Stay back. If you touch me, this video goes live to every investor in your firm. Do you want to be the man whose mother ruined his career?" I pressed the button. The 85-inch screen flickered to life. It was a crystal-clear feed from 12 days ago, Eleanor's private suite. The audio filled the room, Eleanor's laughter and Sebastian's heavy breathing. If Ivy knew her husband was doing this to her mother, she'd lose her mind. Sebastian's recorded voice moaned. "Ivy is a child," Eleanor's voice replied. "As long as we keep funneling that $95,000 through your shell company, we can play as much as we want." Ivy collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing. Dominic's jaw was slack, his eyes fixed on his mother's betrayal. The power in the room didn't just shift. It shattered. "Happy New Year, you bastards!" I said, my voice a cold, triumphant whip crack. "I'm not your wife anymore, Dominic. I'm your worst nightmare." I grabbed my coat. "Ivy, if you have any spine left, get your keys. I'm leaving this dumpster fire. The rest of you can burn." "Your exit strategy," I said. "It's a copy of the wire transfers Sebastian made. Take it to a lawyer. On scree." The icy wind of the Rockies slapped my face as I slammed the heavy oak door of the cabin behind me. The muffled sounds of Dominic's screams and Ivy's wails were cut short, replaced by the rhythmic crunch of my boots on the fresh powder. I didn't head for the SUV. I walked toward the edge of the terrace, looking out over the dark, jagged peaks of Aspen. I wasn't crying. I was breathing, really breathing, for the first time in 5 years. Valerie, wait. I turned to see Ivy stumbling out of the house, clutching a thin coat over her evening dress. She looked broken, her mascara smudged into dark hollows under her eyes. "Is it true?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "The money, my mother, Sebastian, all of it. The camera doesn't have an imagination, Ivy." I said, my voice as hard as the frost on the pines. "That $95,000 you thought was for your future home? It's been paying for their secret hotel suites and Sebastian's offshore gambling debts for months." I had no idea," she whispered, collapsing against a stone pillar. "That's because they raised you to be a decorative bird in a gilded cage," I snapped, stepping toward her. My anger wasn't just for Dominic anymore. It was for the sheer, arrogant waste of this entire family. "They expected me to be the same. But while you were looking at Pinterest boards, I was looking at bank statements." I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope I had hidden in the mudroom earlier that day. I tossed it onto her lap. "What is this, L? Not one of your father's cronies. If you stay, they'll swallow you whole to protect their reputation. If you leave now, you might actually save your soul." "Why are you helping me?" she asked, looking up with wide, terrified eyes. "You hate us." "I hate them," I corrected, pointing a gloved finger back at the glowing windows of the cabin. "You are just a victim of their tradition. But don't mistake my help for kindness, Ivy. I'm doing this because the more of us leave, the faster their house of cards falls." I left her there and climbed into my rented Range Rover. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw Dominic's silhouette through the window, pacing like a caged animal. He had tried to use a belt to show his power. I had used a $15,000 surveillance system to take it away forever. As I drove down the winding mountain road toward the airport, my mind drifted back to how this began. 6 months ago, I was the perfect wife. I sat at the head of the table, smiled at the right times, and ignored the lipstick on Dominic's collars. But then I found the first anomaly, a $25,000 discrepancy in our joint investment account. When I asked Dominic, he had laughed and patted my cheek, telling me to stick to choosing the curtains. That was his first mistake. He thought I was a trophy. He forgot I was a math major who had worked 3 jobs to put myself through college before I ever met him. I didn't hire a divorce lawyer first. I hired a forensic accountant, and then I hired a technician who specialized in discreet home security. Every time Eleanor insulted my upbringing, I installed a camera. Every time Dominic threatened me with discipline, I recorded a conversation. I had become the architect of my own liberation brick by agonizing brick. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from an unknown number. "The files have been uploaded to the secure server. Midnight release is locked. Give the word." I looked at the clock on the dashboard. 11:15 p.m. 45 minutes until the world found out that the noble house of Sterling was built on a foundation of incest and embezzlement. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. This was about an execution. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, the lights of Aspen glowing like embers below. I took a deep breath, pulled out my laptop, and opened the final document. It was a transfer of the remaining $70,000 from the secret account money I had legally rerouted to a domestic violence shelter in my mother's name. I felt a sharp, jagged spark of joy. Dominic thought he was the king of the mountain. He was about to find out what happens when the mountain decides to move. The neon sign of a roadside diner flickered through the falling snow, casting a rhythmic, bloody pulse over my steering wheel. I checked my watch, 11:30 p.m. 30 minutes until the Sterling dynasty became a tabloid punchline. As I stared at the dark highway, my mind drifted back 6 months back to the day the first crack appeared in my polished, miserable life. It didn't start with a scream. It started with a misplaced receipt and a lie that felt too heavy for the air. Dominic had returned from a high-stakes merger in London. He was irritable, smelling of expensive gin and a floral perfume that definitely wasn't mine. As he threw his blazer onto the bed, a slip of paper fluttered out. It wasn't a London hotel bill. It was a receipt for a jewelry boutique in Manhattan dated 2 days prior, a day he was supposedly over the Atlantic. The purchase, an $18,000 diamond tennis bracelet. Dumb. I had asked that evening, my voice deceptively light. How was the London office? Did you manage to get that deal through? Exhausting, Val. He snapped, not looking up from his phone. Those Brits love to waste time. Why are you grilling me? Just be glad I'm back to pay for your overpriced Pilates classes. I felt a surge of heat crawl up my neck. It wasn't just the lie. It was the casual way he used my supposed dependence as a weapon. I'm not grilling you. I just thought since you were so busy, you might have forgotten to give me the bracelet you bought on Tuesday. The room went silent. Dominic's thumb stopped mid-scroll. He looked up, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. I bought that for a client's wife, Valerie. It's called business. Something you wouldn't understand between your hair appointments and lunch dates. Don't go through my pockets again. It's pathetic. Pathetic. The word echoed in my head like a slap. The next morning, I didn't go to my hair appointment. I went to our private study and opened the digital bank records. I'm a math major, a fact Dominic had conveniently forgotten when he decided I was just a trophy. I spent 4 hours digging through layers of encrypted transactions until I found a ghost an account labeled SH Holdings. I watched as $25,000 was moved from our joint savings into that account every month for the last quarter. I called Mr. Henderson, the family's longtime accountant. Mr. Henderson, I'm looking at some discrepancies in the SH Holdings account. Can you clarify the nature of these transfers? There was a long, suffocating pause. Mrs. Sterling, that account is managed directly by Eleanor. It's a private family trust matter. I suggest you stay out of it. It's better for everyone if you just enjoy your lifestyle. My lifestyle? I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. You mean my cage? I hung up and realized the truth. They weren't just cheating me out of a marriage. They were embezzling from the very trust I was supposed to inherit a portion of. That afternoon, I met a private investigator in the park. I didn't want to find a mistress. I wanted to find the money. 3 weeks later, she handed me a folder that changed everything. There were photos of Eleanor, my saintly mother-in-law, entering a boutique hotel in Greenwich. 10 minutes later, Sebastian, Ivy's husband, followed her in. They weren't discussing family business. I remembered coming home that day to find Eleanor in my kitchen. She had looked at me with her usual disdain. You've been looking tired, Valerie. Perhaps you should take a trip, somewhere far away. Dominic needs a wife who shines, not one who wilts. I had gripped the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. You're right, Eleanor. I think I will take a trip. But I promise you, when I come back, I'll be the only one left standing. She had sneered, oblivious to the fact that I had already purchased the first 3 pinhole cameras. Dream on, girl. You're a replaceable part in this machine. Back in the present, I tapped the steering wheel. The machine was about to explode. I opened my laptop and sent a final encrypted file to Ivy's lawyer. I wanted to make sure they had enough to bury Sebastian for good. The seed of doubt had grown into a forest of evidence, and tonight, I was the one holding the match. The next 5 months were a masterclass in deception. To dismantle a dynasty like the Sterlings, I couldn't just be an angry wife. I had to be a ghost. I had to become the very thing they expected me to be, a shallow, obedient, and utterly oblivious accessory. Valerie, darling, you look positively radiant tonight. Eleanor purred during a charity gala in Manhattan about 4 months before the Aspen trip. She adjusted my diamond necklace, the one Dominic bought, to silence my suspicions with a claw-like grip. See, this is what happens when you stop asking silly questions and focus on your appearance. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. You're right, Eleanor. I was so stressed over nothing. I realized that as long as the bills are paid, I should just enjoy the view from the penthouse. Exactly, she whispered, her breath smelling of peppermint and expensive gin. Men like Dominic and Sebastian need room to breathe. Don't be the rope that strangles them, or they'll simply cut you off. I watched her walk away to join Sebastian at the bar. They shared a look, a lingering, filthy glance that made my skin crawl. I felt a surge of nausea, but I channeled it into fuel. Keep talking, you old viper, I thought. The more comfortable you are, the louder you'll scream when the trap snaps shut. Dominic approached me, handing me a glass of champagne I had no intention of drinking. That's my girl. Mother says you finally found your place. I might even increase your monthly allowance by $5,000 if you keep this up. You're too generous, Dom, I said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. As I did, I felt the small, hard shape of the recording device hidden in my clutch bag. I had spent $8,500 on a suite of lifestyle gadgets, high-fidelity microphones disguised as lipstick tubes and pens. While Dominic boasted about his latest investment to a group of bankers, I was busy standing just close enough to capture every whispered detail of his tax evasion. How's the SH Holdings project going? One of the bankers asked him, leaning in. Moving like a dream. Dominic chuckled, his voice oily with confidence. We've moved $40,000 this week alone. My consultant in the family ensures there's no paper trail. It's foolproof. I tightened my grip on my bag. Foolproof, no, Dominic. You're just arrogant. The hardest part was the nights. Lying in bed next to a man I loathed, feeling his hand on my waist, knowing he was a liar and a thief. I would stare at the ceiling, counting the seconds, visualizing the files growing on my hidden server. I had become an actress in my own life, playing a version of Valerie that was vapid and weak. Valerie, why are you so quiet lately? Ivy asked me one afternoon while we were shopping on Fifth Avenue. She looked exhausted, her usual spot dimmed. You used to talk about starting that interior design business. Now you just shop. I looked at my sister-in-law. For a second, I wanted to grab her shoulders and scream the truth. I wanted to tell her that her husband was sleeping with her mother and stealing her inheritance. But I couldn't. Not yet. If Ivy broke, she'd go to Eleanor, and Eleanor would kill the play before the final act. I just realized that work is hard, Ivy. I lied, tossing a $3,000 handbag onto the counter. Why sweat when I can just spend? Isn't that what we're for? Ivy looked at me with a mix of pity and disappointment. I thought you were different, Val. I thought you were strong. That hurt. More than anything Dominic had ever said. But I swallowed the pain. I needed Ivy to think I was a lost cause so she wouldn't accidentally tip off the others. Strength is overrated, I said, my voice cold. Now help me pick out a dress for New Year's. I want something that screams unforgettable. Back in the present, sitting in that dark diner, I checked my laptop again. The unforgettable dress was currently hanging in a closet in Aspen, likely covered in the wine Ivy had dropped. But the role I had played was over. The mask was off. By the third month of my transformation, I had become a shadow in my own home. I moved through the penthouse like a silent observer, gathering the jagged shards of their secrets. But the discovery that truly fueled my fire, the one that turned my anger into a cold, calculated obsession, happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in Dominic's private home office, ostensibly looking for a lost earring. In reality, I was searching for the physical ledger I knew he kept hidden for his off-the-books transactions. Dominic was a digital native, but he was also a paranoid man. He didn't trust everything to the cloud. I found it behind a false panel in his built-in bookshelf. A slim black notebook. As I flipped through the pages, the numbers began to tell a story far more sinister than simple infidelity. The SH Holdings transfers weren't just for Eleanor's jewelry or Sebastian's gambling. They were part of a systematic drain on a trust fund meant for my future children, a fund my own late father had contributed to as part of our marriage settlement. Then I saw the entry that made my vision blur with rage. December 15th, transfer to SH, $95,000. Purpose, final liquidation / Aspen prep. $95,000. That was exactly the amount of my father's life insurance payout, the money I had trusted Dominic to invest for our future family 3 years ago. He hadn't invested it. He had funneled it through Sebastian to pay for the very Aspen retreat we were currently attending. He was using my dead father's legacy to fund a vacation where his mother and brother-in-law could carry on their disgusting affair. Find what you're looking for. Valerie? I jumped, slamming the notebook shut and shoving it back into the shelf. Dominic was leaning against the doorframe, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. He looked at me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, a look of pure, condescending ownership. Just an earring, Dom, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. The diamond stud you gave me for Christmas. I thought it might have fallen behind the desk. He walked toward me, his steps heavy and deliberate. He gripped my chin, forcing me to look up at him. You've been spending a lot of time in here lately. Are you suddenly interested in private equity? Or are you just bored of the shopping malls? Maybe I'm just interested in you, I lied, forcing a playful pout. You're so busy lately. I miss my husband. He laughed a dry, mocking sound. Don't play the devoted wife now, Val. It doesn't suit you. Just stay out of my office. This room is for people who understand how the world actually works. He let go of my chin with a flick as if he were discarding a piece of trash. By the way, I've moved some funds around for our Aspen trip. We're going all out. I want the family to see just how well I'm doing. $95,000 for 10 days of luxury. Not bad, right? Not bad at all. I whispered, my nails digging into my palms until they drew blood. It's a very significant amount. It's a drop in the bucket for a man like me. He boasted, turning his back to me to pour a drink. I watched him. His broad shoulders, his expensive haircut, his unearned confidence. In that moment, the last shred of mercy I held for him evaporated. He wasn't just a cheat. He was a thief of memories. He was spending my father's hard-earned peace on a week of lies. I left the office and immediately called Miller, my investigator. I need the cameras in Aspen, I told her, my voice trembling with fury. I don't care about the cost. I want the master bedroom, the library, and the guest house wired. And I want the financial feed linked to the main theater system. That's a big job on short notice, Valerie Miller warned. And it'll cost you. I don't care if it costs $50,000, I snapped. I'm taking back what's mine. If they want a luxury vacation, I'm going to give them a front row seat to their own funeral. Back in the diner, the memory of that day felt like a hot coal in my chest. I looked at the digital clock on my laptop. 11:45 p.m. Dominic thought my father's money was his to play with. He thought I was too stupid to understand the ledger. But tonight, he was going to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Never steal from a woman who has nothing left to lose but her rage. The installation was a surgical operation. 2 weeks before the Aspen trip, I had convinced Dominic that the cabin security system was dangerously outdated for a family of our stature. Dom, if we're hosting the holiday there, we need the best, I'd said over dinner, picking at a salad. With the $95,000 you just invested, surely we can afford a state-of-the-art upgrade. It's for Eleanor's safety, too. He had loved that. Anything that stroked his ego or made him look like a protective patriarch was an easy sell. He gave me the green light and the entry codes telling me to handle the little things. I handled them all right. I didn't hire the local Aspen security firm. I hired Miller's specialized team men who didn't ask questions and whose equipment was meant for international espionage, not home protection. While Dominic was in the city finalizing his merger, I was in the mountains overseeing the placement of the eye. The resolution is 4K even in total darkness, the lead technician told me, pointing to a pin-sized hole in the intricate crown molding of the master suite. And the audio sensors can pick up a whisper from 30 feet away. Good, I said, looking at the screen of my tablet. I saw the library where Sebastian and Eleanor liked to discuss the trust. I saw the guest house where the walls were thick and the secrets were thicker. And finally, I saw the main living area where the 85-inch theater screen sat like a dormant volcano, waiting for my command to erupt. I want the feed encrypted and mirrored to 3 different servers, I instructed. And the override for the theater system, it needs to be a one-touch trigger on my phone. You're expecting a show, Mrs. Sterling? The technician asked, a hint of a smirk on his face. I'm expecting a massacre, I replied. The most difficult part was the wait. For 10 days leading up to New Year's Eve, I had to watch. I sat in my darkened bedroom in Manhattan late at night, watching the pre-trip arrivals on my laptop. I watched Sebastian arrive early to prep the wine cellar. 10 minutes later, Eleanor's car pulled up. I didn't need to hear the audio to know what was happening when they disappeared into the guest house for 3 hours. The betrayal was so casual, so effortless, it made my stomach churn. They weren't even trying to hide it from the shadows anymore. They just assumed the shadows were empty. Valerie, you've been so distracted lately, Dominic barked one evening as we packed. He threw a stack of cashmere sweaters into his suitcase. If you're going to be a moping ghost in Aspen, just stay here. I don't want your mood ruining the celebration. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was a thief, a bully, and a fool. I'm not moping, Dominic. I'm just reflecting on how much things are about to change. Change is good, he said, puffing out his chest. As long as it's me making the changes. Now make sure you pack that red dress. I want you to look like you're worth every penny I spent on you. Worth every penny. As I sat in the diner now, the clock hitting 11:50 p.m., I thought about that red dress. It was currently sitting in a heap on the cabin floor, discarded during the chaos. Dominic had wanted me to look expensive. He hadn't realized that the most expensive thing in that house wasn't the jewelry or the art. It was the price of my silence, and I had just stopped paying. I opened the I app on my laptop one last time. The feed from the cabin showed the police had arrived. Red and blue lights strobed against the snow outside the windows. Inside, I could see Dominic being led out in handcuffs, not for the assault, but for the financial documents I'd leaked to the federal agents waiting in the wings. I watched him struggle, his face twisted in a mask of impotent rage. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The eye in the shadows sees everything, Dominic, I whispered to the screen. And it never blinks. The tension in the Aspen cabin during the final 48 hours was thick enough to choke on. To anyone else, we looked like the picture-perfect American aristocracy, clinking crystal glasses of $500 scotch, surrounded by the scent of pine and expensive wood smoke. But to me, every smile felt like a bared tooth. It was December 30th, the night before the execution. Valerie, darling, you're being awfully quiet, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with that faux maternal concern that always made my skin crawl. We were sitting around the massive stone fireplace. Is the mountain air too much for your delicate constitution? I looked up from my book, my expression a mask of perfect submissive boredom. Not at all, Eleanor. I was just thinking about the new year, about how quickly things can shift when you least expect it. Sebastian, sitting on the sofa with his arm draped loosely, too loosely around a somber ivy, let out a dry chuckle.
Này, đây vợ của tôi vẫn đây.
The only thing shifting around here is our net worth, thanks to the new mergers. Right. Dominic grunted in agreement, staring into the fire. He had been on edge all day, his temper shorter than usual. He had already snapped at the catering staff twice and thrown a glass when his favorite vintage wasn't chilled to his liking. He was a man who sensed the walls closing in even if he couldn't see the bricks. The market is volatile, Dominic muttered. You have to stay aggressive or you get eaten. That's the problem with people like Valerie. They think life is just about sitting pretty. They don't understand the blood it takes to keep this engine running. Oh, I think I understand blood better than you think, Dom, I said, closing my book with a soft thud. I looked at Sebastian. Earlier that afternoon, my hidden cameras had captured him in the library with Eleanor. They weren't discussing mergers. They were discussing the $95,000 liquidation and how to frame the nobody wife me for the missing funds if the auditors ever came knocking. They were planning to make me the fall girl for their embezzlement. Is something wrong? Valerie Sebastian asked, his eyes narrowing. He was the smartest of the lot, which wasn't saying much, but he had a rat's instinct for danger. Nothing at all. I smiled, and for the first time, the smile was genuine. It was the smile of a hunter watching the prey walk directly into the snare. I'm just looking forward to the tribute video I put together for tomorrow night. It's a surprise, a collection of intimate family moments. Eleanor stiffened her glass, pausing halfway to her lips. A video? How quaint. I didn't know you had a creative streak. You'd be surprised what I've picked up over the last 5 years, I replied. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the blizzard. The storm was supposed to peak at midnight tomorrow. The roads would be blocked. No one would be able to escape. The perfect setting for a reckoning. Behind me, I heard Ivy whisper something to Sebastian about being tired, and they both stood to head to the guest house. Eleanor followed shortly after, claiming a headache. Only Dominic remained, pouring himself another heavy glass of scotch. You're acting strange, he barked at my back. If you're planning on making a scene tomorrow because you're unhappy, remember who pays for that dress on your back. One word from me, and you're back in the gutter. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could see his reflection in the dark glass of the window, a small, angry man clinging to a fading empire. Don't worry, Dominic, I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. Tomorrow, I won't be wearing anything you paid for. Tomorrow, I'm taking back everything you stole. What was that, I said. Happy New Year. Dominic? I turned and smiled, my eyes cold and predatory. Sleep well. You're going to need your rest. I walked upstairs to my room, locked the door, and opened my laptop. The server was 100% synced. The countdown to midnight had begun. The gathering storm wasn't outside in the snow. It was sitting right here in my hands, ready to shatter the Sterling name into a million jagged pieces. The clock struck 11:30 p.m. The blizzard outside had turned the world into a chaotic swirl of white, mirroring the storm brewing inside the great room. This was the moment. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigar cedarwood and the looming scent of a slaughter. Dominic was on his fourth scotch, his tie loosened, his ego inflated by the praise of his sycophants all evening. Eleanor sat in her velvet armchair like a displaced queen, while Sebastian and Ivy stood near the towering 85-inch theater screen. All right, Valerie, Dominic shouted, his voice slurred but demanding. You've been teasing this tribute all week. Let's see what kind of sentimental garbage you've cooked up. God knows I paid enough for that fancy editing software you insisted on. I stood by the kitchen island, the silver remote hidden in the palm of my hand. I felt a strange, cold calm. The anger had crystallized into a diamond-sharp focus. "Oh, it's not garbage, Dominic," I said, my voice cutting through the room's chatter like a knife.
Thế nha.
"It's a record of our journey, a celebration of the real Sterling family values. Just play the damn thing." Eleanor sighed, waving a manicured hand. I
Này,
want to
đây
get
vợ
to the
của tôi bên
champagne
đây.
toast before the blizzard knocks out the satellite. "With pleasure," I replied. I pressed the button. The lights in the room dimmed automatically, a feature I had programmed specifically for this climax. The screen flickered, then roared to life. But it wasn't a montage of wedding photos or holiday smiles. The first image was a high-resolution scan of the black ledger. The entry for the $95,000 transfer was circled in bright bleeding red. "What the hell is that?" Dominic stood up, his glass wobbling in his hand. "Valerie turned that off. That's private company data."
Từng cà
"Is
phê.
it?" I asked, stepping into the center of the room. "Because it looks like my father's life insurance money, Dominic. The money you stole to pay for this very trip." "You bitch!" Dominic lunged for me, but I stepped back, my eyes blazing. "Sit down, Dominic, or I'll have the police, who are already on their way, by the way, add assault to the list of your charges." The screen shifted. The financial documents faded away, replaced by a grainy but unmistakably clear video feed. The room went silent. A silence so heavy it felt like the floorboards might snap. It was the guest house. 2 days ago. The audio was crisp thanks to the $15,000 microphones. Eleanor and Sebastian were on the screen, their bodies entwined in a way that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. "Oh my God," Ivy whispered, the sound of her breaking heart audible in the stillness. "Mom, Sebastian? Turn it off! Turn it off now!" Eleanor shrieked, her face turning a ghastly shade of gray. She scrambled toward the screen, but her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the rug she had told me not to ruin. "Why, Eleanor?" I mocked, my voice dripping with venom. "Don't you like the intimacy of the moment you told me I should focus on my appearance? Well, look at you. You look like a common thief and a backstabbing hypocrite." On the screen, Sebastian's voice boomed through the speakers. "As soon as we frame Valerie for the embezzlement, we'll take the rest of the trust and disappear to the islands. Dominic is too stupid to even notice the money's gone." Dominic turned to Sebastian, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. You were sleeping with my mother? You were stealing from me.
Ai làm?
Dom, listen, it's not what it
Này,
looks
đây vợ của
like.
tôi bên đây.
Sebastian started backing away toward the bar. "I have 10 hours of this, Sebastian." I interrupted, my voice rising in a crescendo of righteous fury. "I have the wire transfers. I have the hotel receipts. I have the recordings of you and Eleanor laughing about how stupid Dominic is. And I've already sent every single bit of it to the FBI, the IRS, and the New York Post." Dominic let out a primal roar of betrayal. He didn't go for me. He went for Sebastian. The two men crashed into the bar, bottles of $1,000 wine shattering and soaking into the carpet. I stood there watching the chaos, feeling the weight of 5 years of oppression lifting off my shoulders. Eleanor was sobbing on the floor. Ivy was curled into a ball, and the men were tearing each other apart like the animals they were. "Happy New Year, Sterlings," I whispered, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. "The show is over, and you're all canceled." I didn't wait for the police to arrive. I grabbed my keys and my coat, walking out into the freezing night. The blizzard was beautiful. For the first time in my life, I was the one in control of the storm. I didn't drive away immediately. I sat in my Range Rover at the end of the long, winding driveway, the engine idling as the heater fought the bitter Aspen cold. I watched through the panoramic windows of the cabin as the final act of the tragedy unfolded. The flashing red and blue lights of the state troopers finally cut through the whiteout conditions. They moved in like shadows against the snow. Inside, the Sterling dynasty was being dismantled in real time. I watched from a distance as Sebastian was led out first, his face bloodied from Dominic's fists, his hands cuffed behind his back. Then came Eleanor, draped in a fur coat that suddenly looked like a shroud, her head bowed in a rare display of shame. Finally, Dominic. He didn't go quietly. Even as they shoved him into the back of a cruiser, he was screaming my name, his face pressed against the glass, a frantic, broken man who had lost his kingdom and his pride in a single stroke.
Ai làm?
I felt no pity, only a hollow, echoing sense of justice. I pulled out my phone. The notification bar was a waterfall of alerts. The Sterling scandal was already trending. Headlines from the New York Post and Wall Street Journal were competing for the most scandalous angle: Aspen bloodbath embezzlement incest and the fall of private equity's golden boy. I opened a private message from Miller, my investigator. The transfer is complete. The $95,000 has been moved to the domestic violence shelter's account. It's untraceable to you, Valerie. You're clean. The feds are focusing entirely on Sebastian's shell companies and Dominic's tax fraud. Thank you, Miller, I whispered, deleting the message. I drove toward a small boutique hotel on the other side of the valley, away from the chaos. I had checked in under my maiden name, Valerie Thorne, 2 days ago. As I walked into the quiet lobby, the fireplace was crackling softly. It was a peaceful contrast to the war zone I had just escaped. I went up to my room, stripped off the expensive silk dress Dominic had chosen for me, and threw it into the trash can. I showered, scrubbing the scent of aspen pine and sterling betrayal off my skin until it was raw. When I emerged, I wrapped myself in a thick cotton robe and sat by the window with my laptop. I had one final task. I opened the folder labeled The Ivy Project. Despite the venom I felt for that family, Ivy was the only one who hadn't consciously set out to destroy me. She was a casualty of her mother's greed. I sent an anonymous email to her personal account containing the keys to a small trust fund I had managed to pull from the wreckage enough for her to start over away from the Sterling name. Don't look back, Ivy, I typed. The only way to survive a sinking ship is to swim as far away as possible. I hit send and closed the lid. The silence of the room was intoxicating. For 5 years, my life had been a cacophony of Dominic's demands, Eleanor's insults, and the constant buzzing anxiety of being found out. Now there was nothing. No footsteps in the hall, no heavy breathing of a man I loathed, no fear. I looked at the clock. 2 a.m. The new year had officially begun. Dominic was sitting in a holding cell, realizing that the nobody wife had outplayed him at his own game. Eleanor was facing a public shaming that no amount of Botox could fix. And Sebastian was looking at 20 years for financial crimes he thought were foolproof. I poured myself a glass of water, looking at my reflection in the dark window. My eyes looked different. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. I wasn't the girl from the trailer park anymore, and I certainly wasn't Mrs. Dominic Sterling. I was Valerie Thorne, and I was finally free. As I drifted off to sleep, the last thing I heard wasn't the wind or the sirens. It was the sound of my own breath, steady, calm, and for the first time in my life, completely my own. 6 months later, the humid breeze of Charleston, South Carolina felt like a soft silk ribbon against my skin, a world away from the jagged, frozen peaks of Aspen. I sat on the porch of my small but elegant cottage, a glass of iced tea in one hand and a local newspaper in the other. The headlines about the Sterlings had finally migrated from the front page to the legal columns. The trial of the century had ended with a whimper for them and a roar for the justice system. Dominic had been sentenced to 8 years for tax evasion and racketeering. His face in the mugshot was gaunt, his arrogance stripped away to reveal a hollow, frightened man. Eleanor, in a desperate bid to avoid prison, had turned state's evidence against Sebastian, shattering what remained of their twisted bond. She was now living in a tiny apartment in Jersey, her assets frozen, her prestigious lineage a national joke. As for Sebastian, he was looking at 15 years. The noble family had devoured itself, just as I knew it would. I set the paper down and looked at the project spread out on the table before me. It wasn't a bank statement or a surveillance log. It was a set of architectural blueprints for Thorn Interiors. I had used the settlement I fought for the one the Sterlings tried to hide in offshore accounts, but I had clawed back with surgical precision to build a life that was truly mine. No more gold-plated cages. No more performing for a man who viewed me as property. My phone buzzed. It was a photo from Ivy. She was in Seattle, standing in front of a small florist shop she had just opened. She looked healthy. Her smile was cautious, but it was real. And finally breathing Val, the message read, "Thank you for the map out of the dark." I didn't reply. Some bridges are meant to be burned, and some are meant to be crossed once and never again. I was happy for her, but my life in that world was a closed book, its pages heavy with the scent of old ash. "Ms. Thorne, the contractor is here to discuss the flooring for the main showroom." I looked up. My assistant, a bright young woman who reminded me of the fire I used to have before Dominic tried to douse it, stood in the doorway. "Tell him I'll be there in a minute, Chloe," I said, standing up. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. I wasn't wearing the $12,000 red dress or the diamonds that felt like shackles. I was wearing a simple linen suit and a pair of earrings I had bought for myself with my first paycheck from my own firm. I looked at my reflection. The fury that had sustained me through the Aspen snow had evolved into something better peace. I had been the victim, the spy, and the executioner. Now, I was just Valerie, the $95,000 that Dominic had stolen from my father's memory, had done more than just fund a revenge plot. The shelter I had donated it to had expanded, providing a safe haven for dozens of women who, like me, had been told they were nobodies. In a way, my father's legacy had saved more than just his daughter. I walked out onto the street, the sun warming my face. The world was wide, loud, and full of possibilities. For 5 years, I had played a part in someone else's play. I had been the trophy, the shadow, and the fool. But as I stepped into my new office, hearing the sound of my own name on the door, I realized the truth. The play was over. The theater had burned down, and I was the only one who had walked out of the fire, not just alive, but reborn. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began to work. There were no hidden cameras today, no secret ledgers, just a clean slate and the beautiful, terrifying freedom of a woman who finally owned herself. "Happy New Year, Valerie," I whispered to the empty room. It was July, but for the first time in my life, the year felt brand new. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. If you're facing injustice, stand tall and own your worth, because the greatest revenge is living well and finally being free. Thanks for watching Valerie's journey. If you enjoyed it, please hit like, drop a comment below, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.